Hey Faith Family, welcome to the Beyond Sunday podcast at Calvary Bible, where we go beyond the Sunday sermon to explore some rabbit holes and to bring some biblical truths to the surface. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Calvary Bible Church, welcome back. Thanks for joining us again for another episode. We're in the 30s now, episode-wise.
Wow.
Yeah, how about that?
That's really good.
Look at all this time we spent together.
That's good.
It is good. You know what else is good? My jokes. What do you call? You ready for this?
I am.
It has to do with
not.
This has to do with fear.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good.
Don't be such a curmudgeon. What do you call someone who has a fear of giants, or what is that called? The fear of giants. You're not going to get this one. If you didn't get last week's, you're in no way you're getting this one. The fear of giants.
Gargantuphobia.
Okay, you have the N. There's a phobia. Fee-fi-phobia. Fee-fi-phobia. Next time Nate calls me, I'll drop that one on him.
He's probably heard it.
I don't know. I feel like I might get him on that one. We'll see. I'll let you know, but I know you probably don't care. So I'll keep that to myself. All right. So I wasn't here this past Sunday, but I did listen to the sermon.
You did?
I did.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm ready to roll for today. Week 2 of the Barnabas series. We were in the second Old Testament, second and last, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Isaiah 41. Could you give me just, I did listen to it, but can you give me the sermon just in a sentence, snapshot?
Yeah, probably the best way to do that would be to say that because of the special relationship that God has created for us with Him, then we don't have to be afraid because He's here to help us.
Okay.
Something like that.
So we don't have to be afraid. And He tells us in this passage to not be afraid. Right? Do not fear. Yeah.
So the my phrasing of "we don't have to" is probably too soft. As you just pointed out,
Yeah.
Probably a bit soft.
We have to.
It is a command. It's one of those commands that He gives us that shows the radical nature of what He's doing in our lives, because that is such a strong emotion to overcome.
Okay, so let's dive into some questions here. The first one is this, just trying to get an idea of the way that the world copes with fear. Can we touch on some ways that the world tries to cope with their fears? So God gives us, the command, fear not, and then He has some of these reasons why.
Yeah.
I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So we'll get to that at the end of this episode. But what are some of the ways that you see the world coping with fears?
I think one of the things that we face is anxiety. So anxiety apparently is a way for us to handle our fears. And it manifests itself probably in the way in which we think about and dwell on what's scary for us. So there is a tie-in to either a week or two ago, but I think so that's one thing that it seems like Christian and non-Christian share this method of dealing with fear.
Okay.
We get anxious and we begin to think about, what if this happens? We begin to think about, here are some potential scenarios that could develop. So our anxious thoughts would be one way of handling fear.
Okay.
I doubt anybody is thinking, I'm handling my fear this way. I think that's just a human way to handle it.
To react to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in now?
No.
So, that to me on a spectrum, I would put that on the passive side of thing. The active side of thing would be humanity in general, when faced with fear, where do they run to? So what's their place of refuge that they run to? So it could be, they medicate. to help them with their fears. It could be that they find a safe place for them. There's a thing I think called comfort food. Is
sure.
another one of those. Somebody that's fearful maybe could go in that direction. So there are some active ways that we do that.
We cope with fear.
And then finally, I think, just for the sake of our discussion, another active way is people actually fighting their way through the fear, actively, aggressively planning their escape or planning their way to overcome their particular fear. Those are some, I think those are some things that people do.
I have a quote for you. You ready? It's Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I picked this up, and I think there's some truth to it, and I think I know what she's getting at. But she said this to what you just said. I think being fearless is having fears but jumping anyway. I think being fearless is having fears but jumping anyway. And so I think maybe that ties in or connects to that. We're just gonna go anyway. Recognize, and I think you said in your roller coaster illustration that to a some kind of a human level, we can't erase fears or just nullify them completely. You're going up to the top of the roller coaster, you're afraid of it. You can't just have someone say, "Don't be afraid,"
right,
and the fear is gone.
Yeah.
So there's some things that are scary in life, and that would be maybe an approach to coping with it. I have these fears, but I'm just going to jump anyway.
I like the honesty of that quote, because that keeps the fear in play. And then I would say, if whether the roller coaster idea or Taylor Swift's thought of jumping, I think in our text, what we're doing this week is we're saying, whatever fears we have, if we're in the roller coaster car, then according to our text, fear not, for I am with you. So put him in the car next to you, which would have been a good thing to, little Travis, young Travis Nathaniel, if he gets into that car and he's got, let's say, he's got Tim beside him, his dad. So he is afraid, but he's got his dad with him. And so he's going to go ahead and ride, and there's fear there, but he's going to get through it because of who's with him. To use Taylor Swift's idea, when you're afraid, or being fearless means you're afraid, but jump anyway, but you're jumping, but when you're jumping in tandem. And in this case, in our text, God is holding, you and God are holding hands, jumping off. I think that's more human and more real to say that the fear is there, but the faith is there.
Yeah.
And so, it sounds like she was probably, Taylor Swift was probably not going in that direction.
No.
So I would say in our text, beyond Sunday, what we want to do is we want to experience our fears with the faith that God is with us, and he's being our God, which means I am afraid, but he's with me. He's promised to be my God, which means he will not allow whatever it is that's scaring me to take me away from his plan for me. Something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm tracking with you. And so to get back to that quote for a second, to jump even though the fear's still there, that could be fearless. My thought also went, it could also be stupid. Right. Sometimes the fear is something that you shouldn't jump into.
Right.
So the stupidity could be a part of that too, not just courage and gritting and getting through it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, to take what's honest about that quote, but to put it in the context of a biblical understanding and worldview, is to say that even though the fear is there, I'm going to move forward because I have a God who is with me, helping me, going to uphold me.
And this is a great point you're making, because the moving forward or the jumping off the cliff needs to be something that is in the will of God for us already.
Yeah.
That this is something that God is taking us through. This is not, we're not deciding to leave his will and do something that's foolish. We're talking about walking with God in the world when there's scary things happening, and but we're walking with him in his will.
Personal question. and I'll answer it too. What kind of things do you think bring about the most fear? Like if you're going to make a top 5 list of things that scare you most, or even just in general, maybe not for you, things that people are genuinely afraid of. I can get started because I gave it some thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
You want me to?
Yeah.
The death of a loved one, especially when it's sudden or unexpected.
Yeah. Which you've lived through.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so, if I were to lose one of my kids, that's a scary thought.
It is.
Absolutely, just a scary thought.
Yeah.
So that would be one, probably at the top of my list. Being excluded, FOMO, fear of missing out, being kept on the outside. I think that's something that sometimes can be a scary thing, feeling like you're not a part of a group. And this one actually might, be second on my list, but being a failure, just failing, the fear of failing as a husband, as a father, as a pastor, whatever your occupation is, just as a provider, etc. Fear of failure. So we'll get to, the application beyond Sunday in a second, but I wanted to try and get some of these out. And I think some others, like we've talked about COVID and the virus, like for me particularly, the fear of dying or even COVID taking my life, that's something that, if I were to get deathly sick, maybe it would probably strike me different. But at the moment, it's not probably on my top 3. The unknown, the fear of the unknown, what's out there, the fear of the future.
What's coming next.
Yeah.
The uncertainty of it.
Yeah. How are things going to turn out? Will I be prepared? How are my kids going to turn out? That kind of fear. So anyway.
two of those would be in my top list.
Okay.
The 2 that you mentioned. Certainly fear of failure in those realms that you listed. That's certainly at the top of my list. I just pray so hard that I don't finish poorly. And then the other one, that the whole uncertainty of what's around the corner. There's no guarantees of what the blessing of God looks like. And although I've been fortunate to enjoy it for all this time, there's no guarantee that it lasts. There's no guarantee that a church will always flourish. So many factors involved. Yeah. So the uncertainty of that, the uncertainty of what ministry would look like in the future and all that, I think that's a part of, those would be a couple of the top ones. Yeah. And I could certainly think of some, some others, but, just failing the Lord, not to make this sound overly spiritual, although it, it should. Yeah. I just hate the thought of hurting his reputation, doing something like an idiot that hurts his reputation. It's like, and then not to mention all the fallout, from that. So I can relate to 2 of those in particular that you mentioned. Good. Yeah.
So, ask yourself that question. What is it that genuinely brings fear to your heart and soul? Because I think across the congregation we would get a dozen plus answers, different ones. I was thinking about ways that the world tries to overcome these fears. We talked about one of them, just stepping forward anyway, just jumping. Science and technology. How many times have
Research.
You said that? Yeah. The brightest minds on the
planet. Best and brightest minds on the planet working day and night.
Okay, I missed best. Yeah. But, I came close. The
Yeah.
best and brightest minds, right? So science, technology. I think here's another quote I pulled up from some research. This is kind of hitting at this idea that humanity, if we can just pool our efforts together, we can overcome. Yeah. So this is a guy named Chuck from this organization called Move On, which I don't know who they are exactly, but he says this: when a community starts to listen to each other, pull together, and work towards a common goal, then anything is possible. And so pulling together, having community, those are good things.
And they have great potential.
Yeah. But there's definitely limitation there. To me, that just smacks of the Tower of Babel. Right. Kind of a pride.
Right. And so, the truthfulness of that is that God himself had the same assessment of their potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
God,
right.
if you
Tower
know
Babel.
that text,
Mm-hmm.
so God himself says humanity has immense potential
Mm-hmm.
to do whatever they have their mind set on.
Yeah.
The problem with that is the missing element is that's humanity without God at all. And so in our text, that's very similar, by the way, to what was happening in Isaiah's day when Isaiah speaks to these coastlands and he reports for us that the coastlands, they see evidence of the sovereignty of God, but they deny it. And so they say to each other, everyone says to his neighbor, be strong. Everyone helps his neighbor and says to his brother, be strong. And then verse 7, the various tradesmen involved in idol making all help each other.
Yeah.
So you have, actually have in Isaiah that same mentality of we can do this. We can just pull our, let's help each other.
Yep.
And we can pull this off. And this off means, of course, they're looking for ways to, and they wouldn't put it in these words, but they're looking for ways to bring shalom to our world.
Yeah.
And a community that pulls together can do a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
It's
we don't want to deny that.
Yeah, if it's missing God, though, they're missing the whole point is what can humanity do to remedy the curse, which is the result of rebellion against God. So
yeah. All right. So to wrap this episode up, let's take, think whatever was on that top 5 list of your fears. Let's just take one for an example, the fear of failure, since that resonated to both of us. How does Isaiah 41, how does it guide us through that kind of a fear?
So the first thing is to, if I realize that my fear of failure is, if I see that as being failing to accomplish the will of God for me, okay, now I can say in this text, I actually believe what God said. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you, which means I can't fail to do his will. That doesn't mean that the ministry might not suffer.
Yeah.
It just means that whatever God means for me to do and to accomplish at my stage of life, his help, his strength, and his upholding, his support, they're there for me. If I believe that, that will help me to cope with, to deal with, to flourish even with my fears of failure.
Okay.
He's going to help me.
So the person who's afraid of failing in their marriage, same line of thinking.
And this is where this has to be thought through so carefully. The person who's afraid to fail in their marriage needs to trust God for help to do all they can to make the marriage successful. Because 2 people are involved, that does not mean that the marriage will succeed. It'll mean that you will succeed in your task. And that's a huge distinction.
Yeah.
In other words, what we can't say is that God will help. And so since he will help, every portion of my life will reflect his blessing only, no destruction. We can't say that.
Right.
We can't say that at the church.
Nope.
Because look at all the various moving parts that we have. And so you could be doing the best job that you can. If someone begins to slander you,
sure,
then you're going to suffer for that.
I will.
So I think it's really important when you use that example of someone in a marriage, they are trusting God for help to do their role, their part. Whether the marriage succeeds or not, that's not something that they can control. And they have to, they have to trust God with that fear.
So there's
God, I've done everything I can. What happens if?
Right. And I think what I want to hold on to that you just said is there's something that they can't control.
Right.
So would I be okay to say, with whatever the fear is, we trust God because he's given us these incredible promises. We do our part. We follow him in his will. We work at whatever, just paths of righteousness type living. And then the rest is in his hands. So we leave it in his control.
We do.
Because there are circumstances, there's factors at play that are outside of our control. And there's nothing that we can do to guarantee any type of a success or failure or whatever that fear is of actually happening.
Yeah, and I just want to remind us all that the help of God, the strength of God, the support of God does not mean that there's times when we won't need comfort.
Yeah.
Just, I mean,
Yeah.
you see what
Right.
I mean?
To get back to
The
the
whole
series.
point
Yep.
is that the scriptures also provide us great comfort, because in a badly broken world, all of the help that God provides doesn't alleviate any of the pain,
Mhm.
all of the pain that is in this badly broken world. So I just want to remind everyone that the help is there, the strength is there, the support is there, but it's in a badly broken world, which means there's still going to be pain, there's still going to be trouble, and God promises comfort in those things as well.
Mhm.
And you've experienced that, I've experienced that,
Sure.
and that's reality.
Yep. It is.
So we don't want to paint the picture that what happens to our faith is our faith now creates this perfect image of life
Right.
with no, no discouragement, no destruction, all that. That's not what the scriptures tell us, as we'll see on Sunday. That wonderful promise when Jesus is about to leave his disciples, and he says, I've overcome the world. In the world, you're going to have trouble, but I've overcome the world. So you have that mix that we experience.
Mm-hmm. So we take that, we approach our fear with faith at the same time, and that's how we move forward as a follower of Christ. Fear and faith together.
Yeah, and I would just say, if you're working through a text like this week, Jonathan was saying, identify your fears, whatever they are. Just make sure you also say, since I believe Isaiah 41, 8 through 10, I am on mission, that my fears are being met with faith that allows me to continue to fulfill the will of God for my life. So the fear is not debilitating in that way. The sad part is the folks that they're paralyzed by their fear, and they're not accomplishing the will of God, which means they're not receiving his help. And so whatever it is that God has for you to do, keep doing that. And that's a sign that your faith is at work with your fears. And that's probably important for us to think that through.
Yeah.
What
Good.
kind of mission does God have for us? And he's going to allow us to accomplish it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good.
In a scary world.
Yeah, very, very scary. And we don't encounter quite the same fears that Israel was encountering. It's a different context for us, but the reality is still the same. So,
yeah. We still are in exile.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. All right. Well, that's a nice bow on that one. So thank you. Appreciate you guys listening. And as always, if this episode brought up questions, by all means, send them in. Or any given Sunday, you've got a question during the sermon, after the sermon, feel free to email those questions to podcast@cbcmj.com. We'll do our best to address them and keep moving forward together beyond Sunday.
Right.
All right. See ya. Love you guys. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode. And remember, our Sunday sermons are meant to lead us to a life of worship beyond Sunday.